Welcome to Acting for Animation. In these videos, the idea is to give an introduction to the concepts and the techniques that we're going to be using in class, to give you a chance to digest those concepts before we then tackle them in class to bring characters to life. In these videos, I will also be giving you some things to think about and some homework, so please make sure you do watch these videos through so that you're prepared for the next class, and we can have an interesting and exciting discussion about your understanding, in this case, of the viewpoints. So the viewpoints. The viewpoints are a technique for looking at movement, looking at character, and looking at theatrical performance. Developed upon by Tina Landau and Anne Bogarts for their work in directing theatre. This technique divides performance up into 9 viewpoints, essentially 9 things that we look at when we're looking at a character or a performance or a scene or even an entire film or show. So those viewpoints are the viewpoints of space, shape, gesture, spatial relationship, topography, architecture, and 4 viewpoints of time: tempo, duration, repetition, and kinesthetic response. So the first viewpoint we're going to look at is shape. Shape is the contour or the outline of the body or bodies in space. Shape may be stationary or moving through the space. You probably already know shape as silhouette. Shape is made up of straight lines, curves, or a combination of straight lines and curves. You guys have probably studied anatomy, and so you probably know that the human body is mostly made up of curves. But as artists, we have a choice whether we want to accentuate or emphasize the curve, the straight line, or a bit of both. So shape is our first clue. This is exactly what fashion designers or costume designers do to help create the character. This is our first insight into them. And of course, before we even have time to see their gestures, freedom, even we have time to those of us who are constrained by real life, from their movement, whether you want to emphasize or what speed they move at, or straight lines. Just by looking at, you also have a choice of we already start to make want to emphasize the curves about or straight lines, moment to moment. What assumptions do you make about these? So you can see at the bottom from their shape. We've got 2 examples from Superman, and we can see the first one on the left, much more emphasis on the curves, showing the bulge of his muscles, his strength, while as the one on the right, we can see much more emphasis on lines, lots of straight lines pointing out the direction or focusing his energy, personality traits, the battle that he's about to enter, a preference for orderliness. Similarly, does the shape in the middle suggest perhaps a particular era or a particular age of the presumably gentleman? The shape of the person on the right, does it suggest a certain level of motor skills? Do we assume that this person is perhaps drunk or at the very least uncoordinated? And then the 2 businessmen down the bottom. Even though they're both businessmen, again, the shape, the way they use their body, creates different characters for us. Who is the more relaxed, for example, of these 2 characters? Which character would you rather get in trouble from? We draw lots of assumptions from characters based on their shape. Let's look at some archetypal characters. So if you do a Google search for Dorothy Gale from The Wizard of Oz, most of the photos that you see of her are going to be photos like this, where she's standing upright. You can see that she's open. She doesn't cover much of her body. Her arms are not completely to the side, but her body isn't closed off to you. So what does this suggest? Openness, a friendliness. Contrast this with the typical shape we associate with the Wicked Witch of the West. Let's look at another. Julie Andrews, another archetypal, friendly, open character. We can see again if we search through lots of images, or if you look at the recording, you can see her again. Always a good posture, an upright posture, always fairly open, not covering or closing off the body very much. In fact, she's such a nice, friendly person that the most we see her close off is in the right photo there. That's about as much as she closes off to any of the characters. Of course, having an open body as opposed to a contracted body or a closed off body doesn't necessarily always mean that you're a friendly person. Take a look at another character here, Bane from The Dark Knight. Also, very rare to see Bane close off his body, to cross his arms, to curl up into a ball, but I don't think he's sending us good vibes with that openness. Now let's have a look at another example of how shape is used to create character. Let's have a look at Osha from Game of Thrones.
Chances are I won't be nearby the next time that happens.
I'm used to worse than him. I'm used to men could chew that boy up.
So Osha is a wildling, someone who is not part of civilized society but lives out with nature, out in the forest, closer to the earth. How is that suggested by the shape that the actress chooses for her character?
As far south as south goes. Before the long night comes.
So we see her in a lot of scenes very close to the ground. She's given tasks that put her close to the ground. Even in her introducing scene, she seems to crouch or hunch a little bit. In addition, we also see her using very crooked and awkward shapes that the civilized people would not use. You can see her leg is crouched and tucked up near her body. These crooked, unusual shapes suggesting an unusual character.
And they ain't sleeping no more.
And then as we move through the series, look how her shape changes. So a few episodes on, she's become a little bit more civilized or integrated into society. And so we can see that her shape has changed. But there are still some remnants of her strangeness or oddities in her shape. She still has a peculiar way of using her body compared to the more normal people in the series.
Red comet means one thing, boy. Dragons.
So far we've looked at just the shape of the body on its own. But shape can also be made from the body in space, as we've just looked at it, the body with relationship to other bodies, and the body with relationship to the architecture or to the environment. So when you start putting bodies next to each other, they start to tell a different story or a new story or a story that we wouldn't have guessed from the body just on its own. We can see here some examples of stories that would be quite different if one of the bodies was taken away. Another example here. So we have one character on his own going out for a walk, and if we put another character there, then it tells us a different story. If we start to put bodies together in groups, what assumptions do we draw about these groups? Which group of these four would you prefer to meet in a dark alley? Which group would you like to hang with at high school? Which group would you like by your side in a gunfight? And which group is likely to be nice neighbors? So when you start to put bodies together, it not only tells you things about the scene, about the group, but it can also change our understanding of the shape if it was on its own. Let's go back to one of the shapes from earlier, the clumsy person. Now what happens if I put a dancer beside her? Does she still look so uncoordinated, or actually is she executing a very difficult dance move? Or if we take the dancer away and replace him with children running for their lives, perhaps now she's a zombie chasing them, hoping to devour them. Or is it? Let's look more closely at the children and the way they're running. What kind of run is it based on the shape? What can you guess about the children's mood from the shape? Have a look at their spines. So their spines are going upwards. And one of the children even has his head inclined upwards as well. Suggests perhaps they're happy, having a good time, maybe playing a game with someone pretending to be a zombie, but probably not running for their life. So how would we turn this running into someone running for their life? What if we change the direction that the energy is going? So, with this character, we've got the spine extended. Instead of extended towards the sky, that spine is now headed forward, sending much more energy away from the pursuer. They're also bending over closer to the ground, trying to get more purchase so that they can make sure that they continue away from the zombie. So, when we put multiple bodies together, they might tell us a different story than if they were by themselves. And if we put a body together with the environment to create a shape, then we get different stories as well. So, take for example this character, reaching up towards the stars. If we add in the environment, then the shape perhaps tells us a different story. For example, they could be leaping up in the air, or running down some steps excitedly, or perhaps they've fallen into the villain's trap. And the reverse also applies. Just as the environment might tell us something about the character or their circumstance, so too can the character tell us something about the circumstance. Here's a boy trying to push a box. How do you make the box heavier? That's the end of part 1. Go get a drink, stretch your legs, take a moment to digest it, and then come back for part 2.